Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Baldwin Sports Media NFL podcast coming to you. Well, usually I say at the end of an interesting week, but given the news that has emerged today, I think is it fair to say at the end of an interesting Tuesday. This is why we decided to change the recording day from Monday to Tuesday, just so mainly so we can get the results from Monday Night Football into account, but also because of days like today, because you don't want to be left a week without the news, which of course we will be talking about later in the show, but. It is still the NFL. It is still week 6 or the end of week 6 of the 2024 NFL season, and there is plenty to go into, but it will, of course, as I said, be dominated by the news that emerged today. But before we get into that, we must, as always, start with me doing the admin for the show, which is as simple as saying thank you very much for joining us. If you are new, don't forget you can like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening to. And don't forget to reach out to us on our various social medias. We are at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And then on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. So feel free to reach out and talk to us on those channels. And if you are a returning listener, then as always, thank you very much for your continued support and your valued listenership. Now, with that being said, let's dive straight into the show, which, as you can imagine, went through a number of changes today. In fact, I'll just give you a little bit of a brief insight. I noted down I did have my story 1, which has now been bumped down to story 1C. It was initially bumped down to story 1B, but we need to start with story 1A, which is, of course, the news that Davante Adams has been traded from the Las Vegas Raiders to the New York Jets. Now, there are obviously many permutations to this. What did the Jets give up? What did the Raiders get in return? And there's the news that's been coming out literally as I've been recording the past sort of half hour or so about what it means for Davante Adams with his contract. A tweet from Adam Schefter just coming out. Davante Adams already has restructured his contract to lower his salary cap number this year to 3.21 million per sources. 2 voidable years will be added to the deal, and the two sides will now discuss his future in New York after the season. So there's changes to the contract, but I'm not really bothered about all of that. I'm more focused about what is happening immediately right now in front of us and what this means. Again, my interpretation of this is just further proof that the New York Jets are all in for this year. I know there's obviously like long-term plans. That's why you want to fire Robert Saleh as the head coach because it's an instant impact, but also a long-term impact. You look at some of the moves they made in the off-season. Some of the younger players they bring in. Is that going to that's a long-term thing? This is strictly for this year. The fact that they've said they will discuss his future at the end of the season means if things don't quite work out, although I don't see how, but there is a chance that he's not guaranteed a future beyond this year, shall we say. So that is what it all means. They are all in for this season, which to an extent I can understand, given everything that's going on with Aaron Rodgers and his age, how long does he really have left, all that stuff. And in a vacuum, not necessarily, but it does cause a bit of a problem in that if you are loading everything up for this year, what happens if it goes wrong? I mean, they're already starting somewhat behind the 8 ball with, they're at 2-4 at this stage of the season. The Bills at the top of the division are 4-2. Again, not inconceivable that they could go and catch them, but they've got the first tiebreaker as well. So in effect, it's a 2.5 game lead for the Bills that they've got to get, and they've got to get everything ready. Well, when I say ready, one of the main reasons the Davante Adams trade works is because he has worked with Aaron Rodgers before, he's worked with Nathaniel Hackett before, so there's not really a main concern about how much can he bed into the offense. Most of it, you'd imagine if he's nursing a hamstring injury, but if he's available to go this Sunday against the Steelers, he should be able to go in without many problems, as it were. But even so, everything is all in for this season with giving up the draft pick for someone like Davante Adams, and the fact they restructured it shows they may be a little bit hesitant of right. We don't want to give we don't want to pay him as much as we can right now. We want to see what our options are at the end of the year because for all we know, Aaron Rodgers could retire at the end of the year, And then does Davante Adams really want to stick around with, with a rookie quarterback or, someone else they're developing? So that is sort of my concern is because we've seen this sort of method work before with the Los Angeles Rams, with how they would always, give up their first round pick. I think from Jared Goff through to last year, I believe they didn't have a first round pick, I believe, because they always would just give up their picks to get, they got Jared Goff to start with. Then it was always like the Jalen Ramsey and the Brandon Cooks, I believe, was in there as well. So they'd always give up their guy. They would always give up their first round pick to get someone in the team for them to, didn't want to take that risk. It eventually worked out for them, but we saw what happened eventually. Last season, things have started to. No, they're not the force that we made them. Always made them out to be. So, yes, you are mortgaging everything for this year, but it has to work out. Otherwise, you are going to set your franchise back for, I'm not going to say for all eternity, but what is the general benefit of it now? You've cost yourself further down the line. Everything was always for this year, but how much can you really give towards it before you get, before you see the rightful return on things? So there is an element of, yes, you got to praise them for going all in, but I I don't think is there enough of a backup plan for the future if things go wrong for the New York Jets. I don't really think there is. So that is my main concern over the again on paper. Great, Davante Adams, when he was at his peak, arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. Being able to pass on those extra words of wisdom to the likes of Garrett Wilson to see what he, if that can up his game to another level. It's all sort of there, but what is the backup plan and what is the long-term plan for this if it doesn't work out? That's just my concern over the whole thing is, yes, straight away good, but I don't see what the benefits are for it in the long run, and that should always be at least in the back of your mind when you're considering making moves like these. But that does bring us neatly onto what is now story 1B of this episode, and that is the Amari Cooper trade to the Buffalo Bills. Now, that is a move that I think, again, just based on what was given up in the trade. So the Bills receiving Amari Cooper and a 2025 sixth round pick, and the Cleveland Browns getting a 2025 third round and a seventh round pick in 2006 or 2026 rather. I think that's more of a fair trade. They didn't have to give up as much, and with Amari Cooper in the final year of his contract, it's the same sort of thing with Davante Adams, but Amari Cooper is a year younger. I do think Amari Cooper has a longer shelf life in the NFL than Davante Adams does, not just because of his age, but also because of the style of play. I think is also part of that as well. So that factors into it. So I think I'm not going to say that the Bills got the better of the deal because Amari Cooper is great wide receiver, and while I think he's going to have it longer in the league, Davante Adams is a markedly better player. But I think just in terms of what they've done and the balance that they've got out of it, I think that's a pretty good move. Now, it is interesting that this all came out, the Amari Cooper trade came out literally a couple of hours after the Davante Adams move was, finalized and announced as well. Reports coming in that the trade was finalized last night, so it wasn't necessarily in a reaction to the Jets' loss to the Bills on Monday Night Football, but you do wonder if this was sort of said, right, they've got a star wide receiver in the division now. We've already got to compete with the likes of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in the division. We've got rid of Stephon Diggs, so we need another number one wide receiver. Let's go out and get Amari Cooper. So I think that I don't think that is purely coincidence. But I think in terms of what, because the Buffalo Bills have been fine as they are. But to add someone like Amari Cooper, to have him as the number one wide receiver, I think is going to be a very good move. And then it also opens up the likes of Keon Coleman, who's having a very good rookie season, the likes of Matt Collins, Curtis Samuel, Dalton Kincaid. I say that purely because he's on my fantasy team. And he's been okay, but again, I could do with him being a little bit better. But to be able to open up all those options for Josh Allen, in the passing game, I think that's going to be very, very crucial for the Buffalo Bills if they are going to sustain they're going to sustain their place at the top of the AFC East and, potentially moving forward at the top of the AFC as a conference as well. So I think that's a very, very astute and smart move by the Buffalo Bills. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it was made almost immediately after the news was announced that Davante Adams was going to the Jets. But even so, great move there by the Bills. Now, on a somewhat downer note, this was going to be my story one at the start of the show, but we can't not talk about the injury sustained to Aidan Hutchinson of the Detroit Lions. The somewhat downside of the Detroit Lions' incredible win over the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday, which again, what is the story, or is and was the story across all the sports talk shows for the past 48 hours, and understandably so. But for the Detroit Lions, losing Aidan Hutchinson for the season, I think is going to be incredibly big, an incredibly big blow for them. I think this is something that could cost them a Super Bowl place. And I think it was Chris Sims that was talking about it yesterday. He's someone that can make a difference in a game. If it got to the NFC Championship game, repeat of last year when they played the 49ers, is how do you control everything out the line of scrimmage against the 49ers without Aidan Hutchinson? Because you've then got to tweak, send another man in, but then what does that do to your coverage further around? Does that mean you have to stack an extra body in the box? What does that mean for then if you're trying to cover someone behind? And then you've got to focus, you can't have so many men in the box because then you've got to leave up, you won't be able to cover the likes of Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and and Christian McCaffrey in the wide receiver game. So you've got to factor that. And then if it gets to the Super Bowl against, say, the Baltimore Ravens, you've got to stop Lamar Jackson, which, okay, Aidan Hutchinson offers pressure off the edge, but can someone replicate that? Do you have to add an extra body in? But that means you've then taken opportunities, or you're taking coverage away from Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely and Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers, and then Lamar Jackson in the running game. He is someone that impacts a game that much and is going to impact the Detroit Lions that much. This is something that could cost them a Super Bowl place. But it does then beg the question on the subject of trades, which sort of brings me on to my wider point of the discussion I want to have, is whether or not they do replace from within and hopefully someone can step up and be as productive as him, or do they go out and grab someone? Now, as Mike Florio on NBC I don't think he was being totally serious with it, but he floated out, again, not floated out because that makes it sound like you suggested, but he name dropped Max Crosby of the Las Vegas Raiders. Because he gave, the Las Vegas Raiders not really fighting for anything. Max Crosby is from Michigan. I'm assuming that means, Mike Florio is hinting that he was a Detroit Lions fan in the same way that Aidan Hutchinson is. So maybe that's something that they'd want to do. And then, in terms of production level, this isn't, dropping from an A star, an A plus player to a C plus player. This is, an A plus to an A plus if they were to go out and trade for Max Crosby, say. But then Chris Sims points out, well, the Raiders are not going to give up Max Crosby because he's the face of the franchise. Would the Lions be even willing to give up what it would cost to theoretically get him away from there, which would be multiple firsts and multiple seconds, you would imagine. But that brings me to my sort of overall point in this, is why does it have to be a straight trade? This is something I've talked about for a while across multiple platforms, and I believe I've mentioned on social media as well. I think the NFL needs to bring in loans, much in the way that international football soccer does. In that, okay, say the price of Max Crosby is, we'll pluck a number out the air, two firsts, a second, and a third. Say, I don't think that's unreasonable. Max Crosby is a great player, one of the top 5 defensive ends in the game right now. So I don't think that would be unfair. But that means you've got to take on Max Crosby. It's a full trade. You now own him. You then got to, when the time comes around, sign him to a new contract and all that sort of stuff and renegotiate and all that. But why does the move have to be permanent? Why can't they do what, again, is done in soccer and in other sports as well, I believe it happens, just loan him out? So the Detroit Lions give, the Las Vegas Raiders, say just that second and a third. So a lesser price, but you still get to borrow Max Crosby for the year. And then at the end of the year, he goes back to the Raiders. Teams that don't have anything to play for right now, you it's always whether a team's going to be buying or selling at the trade deadline. Teams can still sell, but why do they have to sell and restart again? They can give up their star player, their best players, and then get them back at the end of the year and still be in a good place to compete. I'll give another example. Say the Carolina Panthers, when they gave up Christian McCaffrey. If the 49ers believe that they were one Christian McCaffrey away from winning a Super Bowl, then they give the Panthers rather a lesser fee, a lesser trade package. They still get it. This isn't like a swap and you get it back in the air. They still give them the pick. But then Christian McCaffrey at the end of the year, regardless of Super Bowl or not, goes back to the Panthers. And therefore, the Panthers don't have to go through a massive rebuild without Christian McCaffrey. They still get that player. So it's sort of a win-win-win for everyone concerned, because the player concerned, if he's a star player on a struggling team, gets a chance to compete for a Super Bowl right away, in this situation. The team doesn't miss out. The team that's receiving the player doesn't miss out on a level of production, and in some cases can gain a level of production. And the team that's losing the player gets extra picks and gets them back at the end of the season. I don't see why this isn't a thing. You can even you don't even have to make it official. You could sort of do it underhanded. Like, again, just, the Raiders send, nominally, Max Crosby goes to the Lions. Then the Lions send a 3rd round pick for the sake of argument. And then at the end of the year, I don't know, if you wanted to, the Raiders send a 7th round pick back for Max Crosby. Therefore, everyone gets what they want. So I think that's the discussion that needs to be had. Is you give a player to a team for a strict amount of time. You don't necessarily forfeit their rights and just give them up in totality. You make sure you have something to get them back. Like, the analogy is maybe if you ever watch the TV show Pawn Stars, I have to say it that way because of my accent. PAWN Stars. Are you selling them an item or are you pawning it? And if you pawn it, then at the end of the thing, if you give the money back, you get your item back. So that's what it really should be. You don't have to give up a player for all eternity. You can get them back. You can work it around. I think that's an idea that the NFL really does need to look at, because again, it's a win-win-win for all situations, and it means that teams don't have to sell off one player and then rebuild straight away if they're struggling. They can still rebuild around that star player. It just takes a hiatus for about 6 months. So let me know what you think. Do you think that's a good idea? Let me know. I was going to say let me know in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can let me know in the comments. But again, reach out on all the other socials. Twitter is at MRB Sports Media, and YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok are at Baldwin Sports Media. So let me guys know what you think. And with that, we move on to what was initially going to be topic 2 of the night. Well, I suppose it's topic 2, but it's been usurped by topics 1A, B, and C. So what was going to be our second topic of the night is now our 4th topic of the night. And it is the idea that has been discussed many a time, but seeing as he's just said it recently, it's time to bring up the old debate of should the NFL have a Super Bowl in London. Now, this is sort of timed in the news today that Atlanta is going to be hosting the Super Bowl in 2028. In what seems to be, their latest one, because that's what happens. Atlanta will get the Super Bowl every couple of years, the same as Miami will get the Super Bowl every couple of years, the same that New Orleans will get every couple of years, the same way. I'm sure you can pretty much. There is probably going to be a time where it's just going to be the same, 5 or 6 on constant rotation, a bit like the old BCS days, if anyone remembers that, how the national championship was sort of rotated every year between the Rose Bowl, what was the side of the Orange Bowl, which was in Miami, then New Orleans, and then Arizona. Much in the same way, it's going to be, off the top of my head, the ones I'm thinking of are Las Vegas. So Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Houston usually gets a lot, so that's 3. New Orleans 4, Atlanta 5, Miami 6. I think that's about right. Again, there's probably one that I'm forgetting. I'm amazed the Cowboys haven't managed to get themselves into that rotation, but it's going to be that. Indianapolis, I think, is probably going to be in there as well. So it's going to be that constant rotation. But if they decide to go over and do it a different way, then the talk will always be, when are they going to put a Super Bowl in London? And this comes off the comment that Roger Goodell made because he was in London for the NFL International Series this week, saying, "We've always traditionally tried to play a Super Bowl in an NFL city. That was always sort of a reward for the city to have NFL franchises. But things change. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that happens one day." So he is once again laying out the idea that the Super Bowl could be going to London. And I think this is the first time I'll ever say it on this platform. I've said it again other places, but this is the first time I get to say it on this platform. I don't think it's going to happen, because I just think the logistics of having it all involved and that quicker turnaround for the teams involved, I don't think it's going to work. It works on it. London and Munich and Rio and all these places work as a one-time, once a season thing for teams who have months to prepare for it, because they will. The teams that are in London, that are announced in London, will fly out months in advance, sort out the hotel, sort out the equipment, start getting a second set of equipment shipped out so they're ready to train with it. It can all be done with plenty of months of advance. A 2-week turnaround from the AFC Conference Championship to the Super Bowl, the Conference Championship rather, to the Super Bowl, I just don't see it happening for the players, because there are just so many things that are involved. Again, for a team that's not gone over there, where are the hotel? I mean, there will be hotels and facilities set forth for them, but do they know exactly how they want it? How do they want it set up? How do they want their meeting rooms set up? Is the equipment they're going to be training with, is it to their standard, or are they going to have to bring in something? Are they going to have to bring in something else? Do they have their own catering? Do they trust what's going to be cooked for them at the time? Do they want to bring in their own catering team? Do they have to fly them out at 2 weeks' notice? All of these things on 2 weeks' notice, I don't agree. It's the same reason I don't think there's ever going to be a franchise in London. Because again, same sort of thing. In the playoffs, if the London team is hosting a playoff game and then the team, say it is one of the West Coast teams, say it's the Chargers or the Rams or the Seahawks, have to go to London on a week's notice and get everything sorted out, it's just not gonna be feasible. There's gonna be a huge home field advantage for too much of a home field advantage, if you ask me, for the team that gets it done. Again, you can sort of organize things if you've been to these cities on a regular basis. If you're the Rams and you're going to in the playoffs, so let's pick it up. If you're going to Charlotte to play the Panthers, you've probably been there a bunch of times. You know what's going on. If you're going to New York, you've probably been there a bunch of times to play the Giants and the Jets. You know how things work. To have to go to London on a week, it's not going to be feasible. And then, I mean, that's just the logistics of it. Then there's always the kickoff time being discussed. Americans like it, the Super Bowl in prime time for East Coast audiences. It kicks off at 6:30 on a Sunday. Do you want to keep that? If that's the case, then that's kicking off at 11:30 at night UK time. That's just not going to be feasible, because that means the game's finishing at about 4 o'clock in the morning. There's no way the players are going to be okay with that. So then you think, okay, we'll start it earlier. Okay, fine. If you start at 1 o'clock Eastern, US time rather, that seems fine. But again, how many people are going to have uproars about that? Especially if it means that the Super Bowl in a country like Hawaii, in a state like Hawaii rather, means it's on at a very, very unreasonable time for them to have it, the biggest game of the year. There are just so many things that go on to having a Super Bowl. I don't think London is ever going to host it. I also, if they want to keep it away from the traditional sites, as it were, like, as I mentioned, the Miamis, the New Orleans, the LAs, and so on and so forth. This is sort of another point, but I don't think that London should get the Super Bowl before it goes to the traditional cities. I don't think, if you're, again, because that's another thing that factors into it, the weather. We know the English weather, British weather is not the greatest. Fine. But again, you can say, oh, they've gotten away with that because they played a Super Bowl in New York, which is pretty similar climate, in February. And they got away with it because there was a massive snowstorm the next day. Okay, so you've said you're okay with cold weather, open air Super Bowls. Okay, fine. Give it to Chicago. The people of Chicago and the city of Chicago and the Bears as a franchise deserve to host the Super Bowl more than the people of London do. Give it to Green Bay. Have the Super Bowl at Lambeau Field. Again, there may be some logistic issues with that because Green Bay is not the biggest of cities. You may have to have all the media, media, radio, and everything in Milwaukee for the week before the game, and work out something. But give it to Green Bay first. Absolutely. Give it to Pittsburgh. Give it to Cleveland. Give it to Baltimore. All these places are, life. As I mentioned last week, football means more. Give it to those places. They deserve it. After the dynasty that they've created, give it to Foxborough, give it to New England. There are so many places that deserve the Super Bowl more than London. If you want to, bring out all the things, quite frankly, you can boil it down to just that. There are so many more places that deserve the Super Bowl. Forget the logistics, forget the ease of it. Deserve it more than London. It's just as simple as that. So whilst we get down, we'll always play the platitudes and give the crowd something to cheer for. I don't think a Super Bowl is going to be the draft. Fine, the Pro Bowl. Fine, the maybe no, I'm going to say the Hall of Fame game, but no, that should definitely stay in Canton. But all these things, give the little things like that. Fine, the Super Bowl, the big one. No, that stays in the United States. That's just me. Again, let me know what you think. Right, we are slowly running out of time, and I do just want to touch on again a couple of things that caught my eye from around the league in our roundup segment. Again, it's going to be a little bit of a different show because of the news heavy front that we had at the start, but this is what it is. So, just a couple of things. The Harbaugh brothers situation, I thought that was a really, really touching moment when Jim Harbaugh suffered a little bit of a complications on the sideline of the Los Angeles Chargers game. And John Harbaugh, who was in the middle of his media duties in Baltimore, basically got a call to say, away from I'm assuming the media relations people to say something's wrong with Jim, go check on him. And he just bolted straight away, just said, no, I've got to go. I think that was a really wholesome moment. It just shows you how close those two brothers are. I think that was a really, really sweet moment. The Cleveland Browns insisting that they're going to stick with Deshaun Watson. I've said before, I believe that is absolutely ludicrous, but I do want to bring a point to Mitchell Schwartz. It was a former tackle in the NFL, a former lineman in the NFL, saying basically in reaction to the comments that the Browns are going to be sticking with Deshaun Watson, saying it's incredibly bleepy. Go find his actual tweet. It's incredibly bleepy to do this to the rest of the team. Joe Bitonio is out there every week playing through who knows what and has to wreck his body when they have no chance of being good because of the quarterback. Myles Garrett is playing in pain every week. Feel for everyone else there. I sort of agree. The Cleveland Browns have a really talented roster. Again, it pains me to say it, but they have a talented roster. They are being held back by Deshaun Watson. They need to sort that situation out. They need to, again, do whatever it needs to take to get that quarterback situation sorted so that the rest of the team, at least, has a decent chance of producing something. So just want to touch on that. The Detroit Lions being slightly cocky and arrogant with their calls when up big. I'm to an extent, I'm sort of on the fence with this one. To an extent, there is a level of, okay, you are rubbing it into the opponents. There should be some level of graciousness, but at the same time, it is kind of funny that it's the Dallas Cowboys that are on the receiving end. I will also point out, I believe it was Chris Sims on PFT that pointed out, why are you having your hook and ladder play to the tackle in a regular season game? Sure, that's something you want to save for the postseason for when you really need it. So now that's given something of a game away. So why would you give that away? I think that's a part of it as well. But the overall arching thing of it is this shouldn't have been a conversation if the Dallas Cowboys had kept it a close game. So it's more of an indictment on the Dallas Cowboys and their situation. And then finally, the situation with Nick Sirianni and the Philadelphia Eagles fans basically chirping back and forth. Pun definitely not intended because Eagles and birds and what have you, chirping, whatever. So at the end of the day, I've always said when it comes to like player fans interaction, so long as it's not physical, I think for the most part it's game because you shouldn't, if you're the fan hurling abuse and whatever the thing, you should be prepared to have it sent back to you. Again, as long as it's not violent, as long as you're not throwing stuff like throwing coins or beers or rubbish or anything, as long as it's all verbal, I mean, with the obvious exception of racism, as long as there's nothing that coming into it or, misogynistic or sexistic, that sort of, we all know where the line is. But so long as it's, kept the right side of the line and it's verbal, if you give it, you have to be prepared to take it back. So if there's abuse coming from the fans, expect it to go the other way. So I think Nick Sirianni completely within his rights to give back to the fans in that situation. Right, and now after what's been a very, very heavy, topic-heavy show today, I think it's fair we end up with something light, as we always like to do, and certainly something very, very weird. From the, I don't want to call this the sporting world, but it sort of is. From the world of Conkers, which for those Americans who may not know, Conkers is a game in the UK that's played with horse chestnuts, the actual horse chestnuts, where I'm sure there are similar varieties of games. I believe there's one in South America. I was found out when I was researching this. But basically, you drill a hole through this horse chestnut, you put a little string through it, and then you basically whack other people's conkers. You whack the horse chestnuts with each other, and whoever's breaks loses, and it goes on like that. There was the World Championship of Conkers, which I did not know existed until this weekend. But it turns out the winner, in quotation marks, may have cheated in order to get this, in order to win. Apparently, he's been trying to win for so many years. He's been competing since, I've just got the article up here, 1977 to win the World Championship. Hadn't won it, but he cheated his way to do it this time, and he did it by using a steel, or has been alleged to he used a steel conker at various times during the tournament. So again, you steel against a horse chestnut, against a conker. There's always going to be one winner. So for Americans, this is the equivalent of corking the bat in baseball. Trying to use some foreign substance in order to get, or pine tar, in order to give you that little bit of extra advantage. There was always the techniques we used when we played it in school, because that's what we played in school as kids. You'd soak them in vinegar, or you'd put them in the oven, or there was a couple of other, or you'd use nail varnish in order to harden them up a bit to make it harder. This guy apparently used a steel one, and I applaud him for going to that extreme length in order to try and win, and I applaud him for it. I don't know what the end result of this is going to be, but as I like to say every week, certainly want to look out for. But that is the end of this week's show. I want to thank you, as always, very much for listening. Don't forget that if you are new, like and subscribe, and always hit the notification bell as well if you are on one of those platforms that allows that, so you get our content whenever it drops. And don't forget to follow us on social medias. We are at MRB Sports Media on Twitter, and on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. We are at Baldwin Sports Media. And if you are a regular listener, thank you very much once again for making me a part of your week. That is it for this week. I'm sure there will be plenty more to talk about, hopefully not as news heavy next week when we come back to talk to you again. But until next week, take care, and as always, stay safe.